morning, everyone. Welcome to The Big Questions. We're in Cambridge at the Perth School. I'm Nicky Campbell. Right, Christianity, or the lack of it, has hit the headlines. Well, nearly every day this week. At the Vatican, Baroness Vasi attacked militant secularism. The Queen weighed in. She defended the Church of England's role in national life. And on the radio, Richard Dawkins appealed to God. Our first big question: is Britain a Christian country? Professor Dawkins says we overestimate the number of Christians in Britain and give the faith too much influence in public life. There is still a huge gap between the number of people who need a life-saving organ transplant and the number of organ donations each year. 3 people a day die on the waiting list. So, the British Medical Association is asking for a debate about previously contentious, even illegal methods of increasing the supply of organs. Our second big question: should it be easier to harvest organs for transplant? Sue Burton's son's organs saved or improved the lives of at least 6 people, but she thinks the new proposals for more active intervention are concerning. Welcome, everybody, to The Big Questions. Morning. Well, back in 2001, when the last census, the last published census was taken, 71% of us declared ourselves to be Christians. Yet we know the churches are pretty empty on Sunday mornings. A new survey published this week by the Richard Dawkins Foundation found that the majority who call themselves Christian do not actually practice the faith in any meaningful sense. Is Britain a Christian country? And Richard, your foundation, it was an Ipsos Mori poll, and it polled people who'd put Christian on the census. But what was interesting about it is to a greater or lesser extent, whether it be sort of evangelical or all the way through to vague belief, 78% said that they believed in God. That's quite high, isn't it?
The poll that we commissioned was done by Mori, which, as you know, is a very respectable organisation, and so it should be attributed to Mori rather than to us. The first thing that the poll showed was that the number of people who call themselves Christian has dropped from 72%, I think it was, in the 2001 census, to 54% now. And the margin of error might be plus or minus 2 when the final census figures comes out. So that's already a dramatic drop in the number of people who call themselves Christian. What was more interesting in a way was when we looked further at what those 54%, remember we now wiped out all the people who don't call themselves Christian at all. These are the census Christians, we call them the census Christians. When we look at them, even they are not, in many cases, really Christian in the sense that most of the Christians here would, for example, recognise, I suspect. And of course, they're absolutely free to call themselves Christian if they wish. Totally free country, you can label yourself anything you like. What worried us, and what still worries us, is that if you label yourself Christian, then the numerical strength that you add to the Christian figure may then be used by a much narrower constituency of Christian, who will then argue, oh, well, the country is so and so many percent Christian, therefore we need bishops in the House of Lords, and so on. So I want to dispel a misunderstanding, which is that we're not telling Christians you are or are not a true Christian. It's up to you whether you're a true Christian. But beware of using the ammunition of the percentage number of Christians, even though it's now dropped from 72 to 54. Beware of using that figure as ammunition for pushing through really strong, narrowly defined Christian values when most of the people, or a large majority of the people who tick themselves Christian, actually don't support those Christian measures.
But if they say they're Christian in some sense, whether it be, and it's a broad church, isn't it, Richard?
Literally. It's a very broad church. That's the point.
If they, I know, I understand what you're saying, but if they say whether it be evangelical or vague, Christians, and isn't that what we have in this country? We have a kind of a gentle Christianity. I mean, it's not a theocracy. It's not is it a danger to our...
That's the precise point that we're trying to make, that if you boldly ask people on the census, are you Christian, then you embrace this broad church of people who say, oh, well, I feel I'm a good person, I better tick the Christian box. Well, that's insulting to Muslims and Jews for a start.
So how
It's
is that
insulting to
informing
atheists.
policy in a detrimental and dangerous way?
It forms policy because time and again politicians after the last census have justified Christian policies, Christian-inspired policies, and things like the 26 reserved seats for bishops in the House of Lords by saying, oh, well, the 2001 census showed that 72% of the country is Christian. We must respect them. Of course we must respect their right to call themselves Christian, but why not ask them whether they support bishops in the House of Lords? And they don't.
Or the resurrection, or the virgin birth, or an old...
Yes.
Yeah. OK. Well, Cole Morton, I mean, quite a lot of... There have been strong words this
Very
week
strong
during
words.
this debate. And Baroness Varzi last week referring to, this week, militant secularists, saying they're deeply intolerant, using words like, you know, Stalinist and totalitarian. You've called Richard, in your book, the Ayatollah of atheism. Not sure if you were aware of that, Richard. Why is the slightest challenge, and the slightest, not even a challenge, but a question...
Research, indeed.
Research seen as militant?
No, I'm absolutely right. I will let Baroness Varzi fight in the way that she does, and that's fine. In relation to what I said in the book, that was in reaction to a specific moment that I've seen Professor Dawkins behave in a way that seems to me to be very similar to the way that I've seen religious fundamentalists perform in meetings and in the way they conduct themselves in public. And you know, perhaps that was over the top in the book, but actually the point is that I'm sorry, Professor, I think you're a brilliant scientist, but I think you let yourself down by behaving like a fundamentalist, and I find that distressing.
When was the last time I threw a bomb?
Well, I'll get to you in a minute, Richard. He asked, when was the last time he threw a bomb?
Well,
rather than an intellectual bomb.
But can we talk about the survey? Your introduction said that these people did not practice Christianity in a meaningful way. It was meaningful enough for them to put down on the form that they were Christian. Now, on the basis of a poll that I think is 1,000 people, Professor Dawkins is dismissing as largely irrelevant, and those are the words that he used, the belief system of, by his statistics, more than half the population. Now, what else the poll shows is that we are still a nation, whether or not we're a post-Christian, post-imperialist nation, whether we're throwing off the kind of Christianity that dictated us for 500 years and finding a new way forward in a multi-faith world, we're still a country that very firmly and emphatically has some kind of engagement and fascination with God and with spirituality.
Wasn't that exactly what I said?
No.
You feel an engagement with Christianity, so you tick the Christian box. Absolutely fine. I feel a good person, so I'm going to tick the Christian box. But when we went on to say, when you are faced with a moral dilemma, do you turn to your religion for moral guidance? Only 10% said yes. So the whole point is that the people who tick the Christian box entirely welcome to tick the Christian box. Of course they are. I'm not denying them that right. But don't use those figures to justify much narrower Christian policies when you come to make government decisions. That's all we're saying.
More of which in a minute, Christina. But I want you to address this tag of militancy, because there's a little bit of backlash towards you. And Cole's nothing to do with it, but there's an article in the Telegraph this morning. They've done a kind of who do you think you are on you, and they found out that one of your great whatever ancestors was a slave owner, and they've gone, aha.
You would be amazed at what's been going on this week. One after another. I mean, this one in the Telegraph is just the latest. I really feel we're rattling their cages. When you feel the need, when a Telegraph reporter feels the need to retaliate by going back 300 years to an ancestor of mine, I think he was my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who owned slaves in Jamaica. I mean, how desperate can you get if instead of listening to the argument, you say, oh, his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather owned slaves?
To the best of my knowledge, this is neither a smear tactic nor a retaliation for anything. It was a story that somebody found out and they printed it in the paper. I'm not involved in that story, and I can't comment on it, but to the best of my knowledge, there is no sense of a smear tactic or retaliation.
No, but I have to admit, working for the Telegraph as I do...
the Telegraph on trial.
No. We were rather amused by the fact that Professor Dawkins has often talked about how religion enslaves humanity, And it was interesting to see that he comes from a family that used to enslave people too.
But so that was what prompted the article then?
Well, no, I don't
Yes,
think that's what
yes,
prompted it.
yes.
I'm saying that it was amusing when we discovered.
But Christina, we're all more related to each other in this room than he is to that
Rich is
ancestor.
my brother, actually. Long lost brother.
What's interesting about, this is a political debate as well as a religious one, and Rich has made that point very powerfully. These figures are being used in a political way.
Is this a Christian country, Jonathan?
Well, I'll come back to that just one second, just make a point about the slavery issue, because Bishop of Rochester, has spoken out in defence of the Christian country by saying, look, we abolished the slave trade, forgetting, of course, that bishops were, one of the agencies of the Church of England was branding slaves. Bishops were supporting the commercial trade. And I think what we've got is a situation where neither side in this debate is being realistic about the history, accepting the mistakes of the past, recognising that religion had a good part to play, but also a terrible part to play, and so did secularism as well.
Is this a Christian country?
This country has never been a Christian country. I don't think it is now.
Jonathan,
in terms of, let's take our definition controversially as the values of Jesus Christ. Why don't we?
And you're a Christian.
Is this country really endorsing the values of Jesus Christ? Come on.
What would it look like were it to endorse the values of Jesus Christ?
Oh, well, we might forgive our enemies a little bit more. We might have a more equal society. We might not encourage a capitalist system which makes people compete against each other and work more competitively.
Christina O'Donnell.
I think it's a Christian country, and it should stay a Christian country. Why is it a Christian
country? What do you mean by that?
By Christian country, I mean that everything from the language we use every day comes from the Bible. The church we walk past on our street is a part of the Christian culture. Charity, all kinds of institutions, from hospitals to orphanages to schools, were founded by churches. So our culture is definitely a Christian culture.
That's religious, Christina, but not necessarily Christian. Let's take,
that's part of our
identity.
Hymn,
the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, the Lord God made them high and lowly, each to his estate, was an endorsement of medieval feudalism. It was an endorsement of, keeping inequality as it is.
But that's not
Christian, that's religious.
But that's not God-given. Yes, that was written by a Victorian lady, and it was an expression of her values.
It was an expression of religious values, but I would say not Christian values. And we need to make a huge distinction between the two, because the two are not the same.
But Jonathan, I think that, as I said, we have a culture that is Christian, and it comes in. What completely confounded Richard Dawkins was that he thought we were textbook Christians, that we knew which was the first book in the Bible. We knew what the first 5 books of the Old Testament were called. No, that's not the kind of Christians we are. We are everyday Christians. It informs our every life, and it means that we do believe in charity, and we do believe in helping others, and we do believe in turning the other cheek much, much more than if we were a totally secularist culture.
Not Richard.
I didn't think anything. I asked Ipsos Mori to find out. Research is not preconception.
Yeah, Andrew.
I mean, actually,
British Humanist Society,
actually, that's not what the research shows at all. It doesn't show that people live their lives as if Christianity is the cultural wallpaper. It shows quite the opposite. It shows that although they tick Christian as a sort of cultural box, and the most commonly given reason in the survey was because their parents were religious or because they were Christians, so it's a sort of heritage attachment. Actually, Christianity forms very little of the common sense of their lives.
Well, can I put it to David? Can I call in a second? I think this is important.
Most people, for example,
can I put the David Cameron quote to you, because then you can run with this, if I may. The Prime Minister, he said recently, he described Britain just as that, a Christian country, and he said the Bible has helped give Britain a sense of values that has made Britain what it is today. What do you think of that statement?
Well, I think that Christianity has contributed to the formation of culture in this country, but it's not the only factor that has contributed. It depends when you start the story. Of course, if you start the story when this country became Christian, Christianity lies at the beginning. If you start it earlier, you're with the Romans and Greeks. If you start it later, you're with the secular Enlightenment. So it's artificial and arbitrary to some extent where you start the story. Lots of influences have shaped us. But I think the more interesting question is actually why politicians are suddenly seeming to be breaking out all over saying that we're a Christian country. And I think that's the real question, when it's so self-evidently not the case. And unfortunately...
Self-evidently not the case?
Self-evidently is the case.
Is it self-evidently?
Yes, it is. I think that, let's bring the historical perspective in. We are at the end of a period of something like 500 years in which a kind of Christianity, a kind of British state Christianity, has informed who we are. Our laws, our language, our literature, our habits, our customs, our superstitions. That period, because of the way that the church and the state of the crown are pulling apart, and because of the way that our population is changing, is coming to an end. And so people are asking, well, what does it mean? What do we do? Do we throw that away? Do we keep it? Is there something about that we can have and keep going with?
It's a mere speck in the span of time, isn't it?
Well, of course, but we're asking at the moment, is this country that we're living in informed by Christianity? Yeah. Does it have a residual... The Archbishop of Canterbury said we were haunted by Christianity, which I think is a good way of putting it. The question is where we go from here.
But once it's lost its sort of grip on the minds and hearts of people in the country generally, I don't think that we should be resorting...
It's lost its institutional grip, but it hasn't lost its grip on the hearts
It's
and minds of
totally
people.
lost its grip. Most people,
No,
for
not according to
example-
Richard's own survey.
According specifically,
Yes,
according.
No, not according
to that
to your
research.
survey, Richard. 54% of the country still care enough to say I'm a Christian.
But when you ask them what they believe, it turns out that it hasn't got
It's
a grip
neither my
on them.
place nor yours to confront what they believe. 54%
Yes,
of the
it is.
people, by your 1,000-person poll, which set out to prove that there were fewer Christians in the country than you
It
thought
did
there
not
were.
set out to do
Yeah,
that.
of course you did. 54% of the country still cares enough to put down Christians.
They
all
care
those
enough to
people-
put down Christian, but when you ask them what they actually believe, it turns out that it does not have a very large part, or hardly any part at all in many cases, in their
Good, and I'm
feelings.
happy to live in a country where the Christianity is ambiguous and generous
So
and allows
am
for
I.
other faiths, and
So
where
is he.
God is worshipped and
So
respected.
am I.
So is he really... Oh, my goodness me, I'm panicking. We've had an outbreak of consensus.
I'm deep
We can't be having any of that.
Cole makes a really important point, and that's that we've got to move beyond
Audience?
this polarisation and actually say what do we want to hang on to,
Yeah, absolutely.
and what do we want to, make new.
OK,
I think that's the important question.
Sorry, Jonathan, lady back there, let's hear from you. Is this a Christian country?
Well, my personal belief is that this country is built on Christian values, and I think it's a very, very beautiful aspect of this country. I am a Muslim myself, and there's something I value about this country. But I don't think that people are necessarily Christian in terms of the technical details of that faith. I think they have a general awareness or a belief in God.
And over here, was there anyone? Yeah. Yes, what would you like to say? Good morning to you.
Good morning. I think we're talking, well, both sides really are talking Christianity in an incredibly practical way. And I don't think we're actually addressing the fact that we have a very moral country. And I think, especially the politicians at the minute, the Tories are using this as in light of the riots and things like that, as a sort of moral guidance that they want us to follow. But although I don't like the Tories, I do think that our country isn't Christian in a practical way. The Queen is our head of state, she's head of the Church of England, but realistically, it's the government that leads us. We don't attend church, but I think people do still hold those values. Then again, I think most religions offer those values. I think it's very much geographical, actually. I think that the Far East is incredibly moral, and that's, whether that's because of Islam or whatever other religion.
OK.
I think it's not as practical as we're talking here.
Well, those are interesting questions there, but thank you for that. The whole idea, though, of this sort of slightly vague and some say wishy-washy, but some say comfortable and gentle form of Christianity, and tolerant, as Christina says we have in this country. If you look, I mean, Richard or Andrew, to address this, if you look to France, which is Richard's passed you the baton, which is, avowedly secular, and arguably, as a result, perhaps, of that even, has some pretty illiberal laws, banning of the burqa, religious
Completely
symbols,
intolerant.
and
Yes,
so
I mean,
forth.
Secularism.
Those are very
Would that not
illiberal
be a
laws.
danger?
Well, I think that you can over-egg the extent to which Anglicanism really has led to tolerance, and it was a very hard, ride, and it burnt itself out with literally burnt other people, but it sort of burnt itself out with persecution over the centuries, and then eventually arrived at a sort of, tolerant settlement. But I think that there are many other factors in this country that have led to that tolerant feeling. A sort of a long centuries without any particular civil war or internal conflict, relative prosperity of their economic factors.
Well, we've had
I think
civil
that
war
religion-
in these islands in the last 30 years.
Oh, well, OK, that's true. OK, so let's say England and Wales. and Britain, partly inspired by religion. Well, no, because your question was about the Anglican Church, which is only established in...
It was on Christianity in these
this
islands,
country.
kind of, yeah.
Well,
but-
there are many Christians in France as well, so that can't really be the dividing factor. And indeed, the French state funds various Catholic groups, even because of its secularism. My argument would be that, yes, this is a very tolerant country, and that's very much to be welcomed, but I think that the sort of things that the establishment of the Church of England and the artificially inflated Christian figure preserves are far from tolerant. That 72% figure, for example, has been used to justify not just existing state-funded faith schools that discriminate, but an expansion of them. And it's at the hard edge of political debate that that figure is used to actually inflict damage on other people, and that's the problem, and that's why the survey is important, because it shows that those people who are in that 72% or whatever it turns out to be...
They're very popular. A lot of people want to send their children to them. Some of the specifics...
Well, not the academically failing
Yeah,
ones, so they only want to send their children.
I would not ban the burqa. That is illiberal.
Some of the specific questions on theology are interesting as well. I'll come to you in a minute, Dr. Katmi, but I'm interested in this one. Rowan Williams quite recently said, you don't have to believe in the virgin birth to be a Christian.
No.
Do you believe in it?
Do I believe in it?
Yeah.
Well, literally, not necessarily.
Well, what does that mean, literally, not necessarily?
Well, you're identifying me as a Christian, which is interesting.
Did a virgin give birth 2,000 years ago to Jesus Christ? Was she a virgin?
I don't know, Nicky. I know that the Bible...
Does it matter?
Does it matter to me personally in terms of, the faith that I might have? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I think we are making an interesting move on the basis of what Andrew and Richard were just saying. This week we've had a comment from the Queen, who's made a shift and has started to talk about the Church of England acting as a kind of broker, using its influence on the state, those things that are left of its influence in official circles, to become a kind of broker for people of all faiths. Now, actually, I think that's a valuable and a positive way forward, possibly. It may be the only way forward the Church of England's got left.
Do you believe in the virgin birth, Christina?
I do. I believe in miracles too. And
do you have to believe in the virgin birth and the resurrection of Christ to be a Christian?
And the whole thing is that, you see, what is so interesting is that what Richard and his fellow secularists want is for science to be the only guiding force.
Well, a lot of religious people are secularists.
Well, and for rationality and reason to be our God. But actually, what spirituality is a whole other dimension that we enter into, and that you don't.
I don't care what you believe and what you say.
You care a great deal because you keep polling us. You keep polling us and you keep trying to play a numbers game. And if we're going to play a numbers game, 7,000 members of the National Secular Society is just about as much as
Christina,
the
please
7,000 members of the
this.
National British Sausage Appreciation Society.
We all know that this is political.
Let's not let the secularists
wait.
drive
Jonathan, Richard, remind Richard what he was going to say.
I was just interrupted. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was the point. What was the point you were making? It was the point before that about.
I'm saying that it's not
appreciating.
I don't care what you believe, so long as what you believe is not used to legislate in this country and affect what the rest of us believe. Why do we have 26 places in Parliament reserved for bishops of the Church of England? Why not?
Wait, let him finish.
Could I finish?
Let him finish.
Why not have 26 places reserved for white men?
This is an answer.
If you did that, there would be outrage, and quite rightly. Why do we have 26 places reserved for bishops of the Church of England?
What do you think about this? Well, I don't know about the virgin birth or not. Do you think that's key to being a Christian? Do you think all those sort of fundamental key...
It's up to them. If they want to believe supernatural nonsense, that is up to them, but don't force it on the rest of us.
OK, what about you, Dr. Katmi? Dr. Katmi, do you think this is a Christian country?
Now, let me give you a Muslim perspective on what you ask.
Right.
I have been working for the last 30 years with hundreds of Christian organizations, pro-life, family, morality, chastity, marriage, heterosexual, etc. Why I work? Because this is my Islamic values, the same. We share together the same value. And these values are very few today implemented.
What's going wrong?
I agree, I disagree a lot with Professor Richard Dawkins, but in this point, it's not Christian country. Christianity, 10 commandments are broken day and night by majority of the Christian in Britain. We badly need to go back to Christian value. And if you implement your Christian value, we have our Islamic value, the same, exactly like you. But in the same time, we believe, by the way...
Are you talking about licentiousness and depravity, all those things? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. We believe in Virgin Mary, we believe in Jesus, we believe in Ten Commandments, etc. A lot of potential, 2 million British Muslims to the Christian in Britain. But practically, we should be careful. Don't say just Christian country. We are practically multi-faith country. We have many religions.
Okay,
so we need to be aware of that.
Okay, right, go on.
So 2 main points I want to make. First of all, it's important to remember that faith is a force for good, and I think it's often portrayed that there's always a chance of that there's something like just inherently kind of extremist about religion, so you have to actively moderate. That's not true. Now, secondly, the thing is, when you look at the poll that's been commissioned, that it says that people are not Christian according to this textbook definition. The thing is this: over time, there's been evolution of people's affiliation to their faith. Just because they do not tick the box according to what we may consider to be traditional, religious people, does not mean that they are not religious. I mean, like I said earlier, that they cared enough to tick the box saying, I am a Christian. So you cannot say that because they don't follow all the commandments, therefore you are not a Christian. It's like saying, like, it's a very poor example, that on Radio 4, when they hooked you up, Professor Dawkins, that you couldn't pronounce the name of the book of Charles Darwin, that therefore you're not a good enough atheist. That's wrong. Same thing, you can't do that to a Christian, saying just because you don't go to church as regularly as it says so, therefore you are not a good enough Christian. That's incorrect. You cannot go down that route. People choose their values, and that's up to them. We can't say that's what makes you Christian, that's what makes you Muslim.
Andrew?
I mean, no one is saying that, just to clarify. I think the survey itself that Richard's Foundation did, that Maury did for Richard's Foundation...
Well, extrapolating from it, this point, though,
No, what's being said is that after the 2001 census results were published, and there was a very high proportion of Christians, lots of Christian lobby groups, lots of bishops, lots of politicians leapt upon those figures with glee and said, look, it proves what we've known all along. Britain is still a Christian country. It justifies faith schools. It justifies contracting out public services to Christian groups. It justifies this, that and the other. Now, what this research is attempting to articulate and demonstrate is that that was a mistaken assumption by those people, because actually that 72% has been hijacked, and what that 72% believes is not what it's being claimed to believe, but is something else.
Christina.
That's the important point.
Let's say that... So, given everything that you say, does that mean that you want the state to take back from the religious institutions any work that they do with youth, any work that they do with schools, any work that they do...
No, certainly not. I think
what is the point?
schools...
What is the point of doing this poll?
Well, it wasn't my poll.
Okay,
it was
Christina, what would,
poll,
if there were to be a sudden awakening of atheism and also secularism, two different things, what would we lose?
I think we would lose a great, great deal, because we would lose in the public space. We don't want just the government to be dealing with running schools, with running charities. We want voluntary spirits, and many of them
These faith schools are state-funded.
Christian.
These faith schools are
Yes,
state-funded. They're not voluntary. They're government-funded schools.
But many of them aren't, and what we don't want to
no
have...
problem
No
with them.
problem with that. It's the state-funded ones, which are a third of all our state-funded schools.
But are you going to have state-funded charities? Are you going to have state-funded hospitals? Are you going to only have
Secularism doesn't affect the thriving civil sphere.
We already have
That's
charities.
fine. It affects what's funded by the state in our public life, which should be, treat people without privilege or discrimination on the basis of religion. If there are state-funded schools, they shouldn't be choosing pupils on the basis of religion.
Let me come to this lady down here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
First question you asked is that this country is a Christian country.
Yeah.
What I believe, if you are buying Christmas presents and Easter eggs, yes, it is a Christian country.
Well...
Yes, it is a Christian country, but when it comes to moral issues, I'm sorry, it is not. What I believe is our government professors' research could be actually used as a positive manner, thinking that, yes, we are failing as a Christians and we need to upgrade. Now, every time there's a wedding or marriage take place, I think that should be actually applauded rather than discriminated against tax. I think family life should be encouraged. Abortions and single parenting should be discouraged, and help people to stay within marriage, create a stable family, which actually Christianity supports.
Is this your view of Christianity?
I think a slightly different view of Christianity, but I think the important thing is we have the conversation about it. And what worries me is while we have this polarisation, we don't get a sensible conversation. So let's discuss. Would it be good to give tax breaks to married couples? I don't think so. I would like to see tax breaks to civil partnerships. I'd like to see people be able to, heterosexuals to engage in civil partnerships and gay people be allowed to get married. I think that's a tolerant Christian view.
But you cannot have a Christian country and have a faith oriented country when you have a civil partnerships and you're encouraging X, Y, Z. I'm sorry, I do not want
For me,
to
it comes back
discriminate
to
against anybody, but
what is a
you have
Christian
to.
view of government, what is a Christian view of the state? And to me, it is one that allows for plurality, effectively a secular one, which is not value-free, but doesn't impose any one religious form on the nation. And surely that's what, the best religious view is of all.
Yeah, cool.
Well, absolutely. I think we are in a position where we will have to find a way forward that allows for plural. I can't even say the word. We have 1,000 gods instead of one. Actually, Richard, we don't have no God. We have 1,000 gods instead of one in this country. We need to find a way forward to allow that to be and to celebrate that. Nobody really believes that there should be 26 bishops in the House of Lords these days. We've got to change that.
Why do we have them?
Can I finish? But what we do have to find a way forward that reflects the fact that Britain is still fascinated by God.
Yeah, yeah. And still needs God.
But, Nicky, there is a point. I've been debating with a number of people this week that do believe there should be 26 bishops in the House of Lords, do believe that church schools should be able to discriminate in admissions and employment, and I think that does need to be challenged. I think we need to be honest about that. And there are religionists who are, need to be called to account, as well as there are secularists who need to be called to account.
What interests me is that there are religionists on one side, there are atheists on the other side. There are, by Richard's estimation, 30 million people sitting in the middle, scratching their heads, watching this programme and going, what about us?
30 million, I wish. Richard, you've said faith is a spent force in the UK. Do you think the trends are very much the, religion is slowly crawling into the dustbin of history?
Yeah, I think so. And actually showing some signs of desperation. I mean, when you think that what faith actually is believing something without evidence, how can you possibly justify believing something without evidence? If there is evidence, it's not faith anymore. It's evidence. It's what people who believe in science believe in.
What percentage of the universe don't you know anything about these days? I can't remember.
A very great
94%?
deal. A very great deal. And I don't say, therefore, I believe so-and-so. I say, I'm waiting to find out. We're working on it. We need more research.
So do Christians.
Then why do you have faith in things like the virgin birth, in the resurrection? I'm glad you don't, but many do.
I do, and Richard...
I know you do.
How can you justify believing something of which there's no evidence?
Can I tell you, Richard, because I believe in the resurrection, and the reason is it offers me a hope of the future and a vision, and actually it shapes my ethics. And I come to similar conclusions in some areas to you because of my faith. You get there by a different route.
Okay.
And we disagree on some things because I come a different route.
That's very revealing.
It's important to respect that.
That's very revealing. You believe something because it gives you hope.
Nicky, sorry.
My case rests.
We are going to leave it there. Listen, thank you all so much for taking part. Thank you in that particular debate. Now, if you'd like to have your say about that debate, log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. You'll find links to continue the conversation online. We're also debating live this morning from the Perse School in Cambridge. Should it be easier to harvest organs for transplant? And also, if you'd like to be in the audience at a future show, you can email audience@menton.tv. We are in Cardiff next week. Then on March the 4th, we're in York to record 2 shows, and we're in Leicester on the 18th of March.